That's an insane difference.
Let's have a listen.
Let me put it on the speakers. Scientists in a lab making up a logo. Stop doing that and go and make some more vaccines.
Hello, James here from Present Day Production, and in today's video we are going to compare a commercial mix bounced in real time in Logic Pro and that same mix bounced offline. Compare the two in a null test to determine if there's any difference between them, and the results may surprise you. But first, let's quickly cover some of the popular arguments for and against each approach. Many people say that you're better off bouncing offline, as your DAW then devotes its processing power to rendering the bounce and doesn't have to process any virtual instruments and effects at the same time. Others say that you need to bounce in real time, as your audio won't hit any compressors in the same way offline, and you'll end up with a better sounding mix. Is there any substance behind that argument? Aren't plugins just processing ones and zeros? We'll find out shortly. Many DAWs, Pro Tools being the best known one, didn't even offer anything other than real-time bouncing until quite recently. And of course, if you're using external hardware processing, you'll need to bounce in real time, just as Mark had to before the advent of computers. Or did he?
One of the engineering art forms that seems to be getting increasingly lost these days is the art of half-speed mastering. When making vinyl records, for physical production, the music first needs to be cut to a lacquer. This is essentially a blank record placed on a very expensive cutting lathe that is effectively a record player operating in reverse, and the music is cut onto the lacquer in the form of a groove. The resulting groove is a physical representation of that audio, and that's why mastering for and cutting to vinyl is a real engineering skill. Too much bass or out of phase information and the groove closes up, the stylus pops out and the record won't play. Too much high end and you risk burning out the very expensive cutting head, as it has to move much faster to cut higher frequencies into the lacquer. And hence was born the practice of half-speed mastering. This saw the lathe running at half speed and the transfer tape machine that the track was being cut from also operating at half speed. Now this offers distinct technical advantages. The high, very fast transient cycles of the top end become much more manageable mid-range cycles, and the cutting head also has twice as much time to cut the intricate groove, resulting in a cooler cutting head, greater accuracy in the cut, which therefore leads to better audio quality, a more defined stereo image, higher dynamic range, a smoother high end, more detailed mids, a richer, fuller low end. Once the lacquer is cut, then it heads off as usual to be electroplated to become the form for the stamper that is then used to press the vinyl. So we didn't always do everything in real time back in the analog days.
Let's take part of a track that we recorded and mixed here. In this case, it's a track from Mark's band The Get Up's last album, and bounce it out in real time. Now let's touch nothing and perform the same bounce offline. Let's switch between the two and see if we can hear any difference. They sound pretty much the same to me, but let's perform a null test by placing them in Logic and flipping the polarity of one. As one bounce is now 180 degrees out of phase with the other, this means that any identical audio will completely cancel out, and we will only be left with the difference. Okay, so there's quite a difference there, particularly in what sounds like the compression of transients, but the null test won't tell us which is which, and which actually sounds better. Is performing a real-time bounce really affecting how audio hits compressors?
Every bone in my body tells me that's bollocks. We're dealing with a computer here, and there's no audio hitting compressors at all unless we're going out into hardware. The compressors are plugins. They are digital processing. They don't physically exist, and neither does the audio. The audio isn't audio. It's a digital representation of audio. It's zeros and ones as long as it's in the computer, and it can't become anything else until it comes back out again. So I don't buy the audio hits compression differently in real time argument. I'd expect complete cancellation from an offline and a real-time bounce when nulled. But I might be wrong. What is actually going on here? Let's ask our resident plugin developer and chief digit juggler, Jamie.
What's happening here is that Mark has used plugins on a mix that use very clever algorithms to model how the hardware units they are based on behave. Physical electronics aren't perfect, and if you run your audio out and into a hardware device, particularly a compressor, it's going to react and therefore sound slightly different every time. That difference won't usually be enough to hear in an A/B test with well-designed and built hardware, but it will be enough to scientifically prove the difference in a null test. Mark has used his favourite Slate bundle on the mix, and the developers at Slate have done a very good job at not just modelling the sonics of the hardware, but also incorporating some of the randomness that analogue hardware can impart on a signal passing through a number of different times.
This makes much more sense, and whilst developers might not take it as far as having to wait for a Valve-inspired plugin to warm up for a couple of hours before you use it, many plugin developers add this randomness into their algorithms. To demonstrate this scientifically, all we need to do is perform a null test with 2 offline bounces or 2 real-time bounces. Once again, the null test is showing us that there is a difference between these supposedly identical bounces, although again, it's pretty much impossible to pick between them on an A/B listening test. So this is all really interesting, but it doesn't answer our question. Is there any sonic difference between an offline or a real-time bounce? In Logic Pro at least. If we bypass all the modelling plugins on the mix and perform the null test, we get this. Silence. So, as Mark predicted, there is no difference at all between bouncing offline or in real time. The differences we heard earlier are purely down to the randomness of the algorithms in certain hardware modelling plugins. So let's try replacing those compressors with instances of Logic's own Platinum digital compressor and perform the null test again. Once again, silence. And if we switch the compressors in Logic to random selections of the analog modelling type, we also get nothing. So Slate are maybe putting a little more thought into the development of the finer details of their plugins than Apple are.
Tasty. So there's our answer. In the case of Logic Pro at least, there's no audible reason to favour a real-time bounce over an offline one, or vice versa. And whilst neither myself, James or Jamie could hear any difference between the various Slate bounces, the null test clearly showed us that there was one. Although as we really couldn't hear it, I don't suddenly feel the need to perform several bounces of the same project and then try and pick a winner. Try this yourself with your own DAW and with whatever plugins you are using, and let us know the results in the comments. And remember, create, don't hate, and don't just post, "What about UAD plugins in Reaper?" Try it for yourself and let us and everyone else know your results. Do several bounces of a mix without touching a thing, and then see if you can pick a difference between them, and then perform a null test to see if there is.
As always, thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing and ding the ding dong to be notified of future videos if you haven't already. And you'll see us in the next one. Hello, fish. Ah.